Steve, in your book True Legends, you talk about a Smithsonian cover-up whenever giant bones are involved. So I want to ask you the question that everybody always asks. Where are all the giant bones?
It's interesting, Tim, because of the bias of the Smithsonian and their contempt for out-of-place artifacts. Every time giants were found, it didn't matter if it was on the West Coast, the Arctic, the Antarctic, believe it or not, the East Coast, the Ohio River mounds. They always have a fabulous cutoff point, meaning once the Smithsonian is notified and those bones are sent to the Smithsonian, they're never heard from again. And there's denials. A good example of that, it was a famous Kincaid expedition in the Grand Canyon, where they found the Egyptian citadel. Even the Phoenix Gazette carried that story. So, Tim, the cover-up has always been to keep this biblically relevant topic. Reconcile the fact that a lot of servicemen, U.S. servicemen, had been eaten, cannibalized, as well as Japanese. And the fascinating investigation I've come up with was the fact that the Solomon Islands are riddled with stories of cannibalistic giants and even living giants to this day. I was contacted by a man named Marius who was literally going to meet me in California with, let's just say this, irrefutable evidence. But he said to me on the phone, he said, Steve, I'm being followed, and I'm not sure I'll even make it there alive. What has to be asked, the question that needs to be asked and has to be asked, is that why do people who have the evidence, why are they intimidated? Why are they threatened? Why are they disappeared? What is this cover-up? And I'll tell you the bottom line, they do not want people to understand that the sons of God, the fallen angels, saw that the daughters of earth were fair, mated with them, and produced a literally new race of hybrid beings that the Bible calls the Rephaim. And the Rephaim are with us today. They're genetic trace, they're genetic markers. And when we get into super soldiers, Tim, the super soldiers, the most important expenditures made are to identify not only the bloodline, but the genetic traits. There are people literally not only wanting to bring the giants back, but to insert giant genes in our soldiers to give them the super soldier ability. More money is being spent to identify genetic traces and markers, the actual gene prints of giants, both dead and extractable DNA from their teeth, from whatever cells in the mummies, to literally living giants today.
So in other words, what you're saying is somebody's trying to weaponize giant genes.
Absolutely. And the Super Soldier program is probably one of the most almost unbelievable, yet so believable programs that the U.S. military is involved in. And all the underground labs, all the secret places around the planet, everybody's after the same thing. They want comic book heroes that we would only laugh about and have laughed about maybe for 50 years, and now it's no longer fantasy, it's fact.
And we're not just talking about superhuman strength, are we? We're also talking about superhuman cerebral capabilities that the giants had.
Absolutely. Speaking of cerebral capabilities, the giants, even when they're in a stasis state, that means in suspended animation, whether it's Dr. Ernest Muldashev in Russia, in the mountains of Tibet, whether it's a whole underground base in which some of these entities, these living giants, are present, they have so much cerebral energy that they actually have what's called the red line. And you can't go past that, or literally, they claim, according to special operations, 4-star generals, that literally it causes a person to almost come apart at the seams. It not only drives people mad, but it literally just causes them to go to pieces. You understand that's the ultimate weapon. You know, Michael Crichton with Jurassic Park brought us dinosaurs, and now we're hearing about woolly mammoths being cloned, and we're hearing all these news stories that Neanderthal is no longer a member of our family tree, which I've said for 30 years. But the point being is that it's all about weapons. And as a general said to me in special operations, it doesn't matter if it's ancient technology, doesn't matter if it's ancient genetics, those of us are either fighting to keep it out of the hands of the wrong people, or the wrong people are fighting us to kill us to get it into their hands. There's a war going on, and it's no longer just dusty old bones in a museum stuck away.
So Steve, according to Genesis 6, fallen angels had sexual relations with human women, creating these hybrid half angel, half human giants. In a weaponized, military weaponized sense, what other capabilities might these super soldiers have if they have the genes of giants?
Well, beyond the obvious of strength, beyond the obvious of almost supervision, super hearing, one of the most remarkable things from my four-star general friend was basically said they hunt by DNA. Every person's DNA has a specific harmonic that they could identify a specific target's DNA and assign a Fido, the 19-foot giant, to go after. And it was interesting because when you think about it, even going back to Jack the Giant Killer and Jack Be Nimble, Jack Be Quick, as I've been researching all these, remember the statement? Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. You go to the Bible, and whose blood cried out? Righteous Abel blood cried out to the living God after Cain slew him. So the harmonics of blood is fascinating. That's why the cry of the innocent blood is such a big deal in God's eyes, and it truly is, because the blood has a signal, a frequency, and there have been studies to prove that. So they want the giants to be able to basically target specific DNA characteristics. Not to mention the bottom line, and you know how much I love to say that, these entities want every last human being destroyed, and in its place a hybrid. They're going to try and prove that God's a liar. Jesus himself said if the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive, yet for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened.
You've turned down opportunities to work with some of the major networks on documentaries concerning giants. Why have you decided not to work with them? And furthermore, why have you decided to start your own production company, Gen 6 Productions?
Tim, it's just simply this. I believe the big lie that's going to be hoisted upon the world is that the aliens created mankind, which I categorically reject. It's funny, the people that will accept the fact that the Anunnaki, star creatures, came to this planet will avoid fallen angels like a plague. I wanted the correct, in my opinion, after 40 years of research, I wanted the correct historic and biblical presentation of the giants. And quite candidly, when I talk to some of them, if I start talking about fallen angels having sex with earth women, they snicker. Well, that snicker tells me they've already made up their mind. And I said, I will only appear on camera if I can have final edit of what I say. Guess what? Nobody wanted to do that. That tells me there's agenda. So I believe this is a time that you and I are going to basically go out and say to the world, okay, here's what those guys are saying, but here's not only what the Bible says, and here's how accurate the Bible is with the history that follows. Gen 6 Productions is totally different than everything else that's on the TV, everything else that's on the documentary. Everybody's looking in a rear-view mirror at history, just trying to find the bones and find the original documents of all of the different finds, and I've spent 20 years doing that already. But we're taking people, Tim, simply where no one else has ever gone before. They're starting from the premise that all the giants are gone. We're starting from the premise that there are modern-day giants now who aren't suffering from acromegaly or some pituitary disorder, but they're literally going to fulfill the biblical statement of Matthew 24, where Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, so would it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Most people do not understand the evil. Most people can't even embrace the fact that this isn't about old bones. This is about a contemporary threat beyond any science fiction twisting of the facts. And that's why we're going to, I believe the best antidote, that's why we're going to do this thing, Gen 6 Productions. We're going to present information. We're going to present eyewitness testimony. Again, we're not just dealing with bones. Obviously, we'll follow the leads of bones, but we're going to show the people out there what the truth is and why this cover-up has been a multi-thousand-year cover-up, and what the expectation that everyone is going to, not only the expectation, but what is going to be presented to the people as the gods who made us. And I got to share this. When I did write the book True Legends, Genesis 6 Giants, Aliens and Fallen Angels, Angel Wars, everything I've written is to this point where Jesus said, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. And the genetic tampering, the genetic destruction, the designs of the Luciferian globalists to destroy every human being on the planet, to insert their new creation, that we'll call him the Uberman, Nietzsche's statement, the Superman. What it's going to be is a super slaughter. And by giving people the correct information, by literally telling them what the end of the book is, how this plays out in history, my goal is to take away all fear and show them that the truth will make them free as long as they abide in the word of the Lord and the word of the Lord abides in them. Too many people are making too many excuses for the living God, and I'm looking for that time when the people of God will stand up, when the people of God will not take a back seat to the skeptic, whose the only agenda he has is what he's being paid to say. We're going to produce, I would say, such a different documentary form and style that I think people will be really excited, and especially to get involved with the Synod.
In other words, rather than looking for the giants that were, we're looking for the giants that are.
Absolutely. And I find it fascinating. Just as we're literally in the time of the movie of Noah, which was just a disaster biblically, it wasn't even anywhere near the scripture, but the times of Noah, isn't it interesting? The times of Noah, and now we got all this interest in giants. Hello, I don't think God could give a bigger neon sign than if he wrote it in the sky. And I'm not taking liberty, but even as everything is lining up, we are in the days of Noah. In the Noah days, there were giants in the land. And now we're having Hollywood just come out with movie after movie after movie, trying to denigrate biblical Moses, it doesn't matter if it's Noah, trying to distort true history so they can insert their own history. For instance, in the movie Noah, this is pretty fascinating. Most people don't know this. The fallen angels are the good guys, and Noah's the bad guy.
They're called the Watchers, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're called the Watchers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think what we're going to do is be able to give you a compressed, truly a compressed understanding of history that when I say mind-blowing, it'll also be heart-freeing. It will help you to understand the headlines, the movies, and the ultimate plan and scheme for your destruction. But the good news is, Jesus said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. And I believe that, Tim, we're at that time in history now. We're in the days of Noah, and everything that preceded Noah building the ark and the judgment of Almighty God on this earth that was in rebellion is about to be relived.
There's so many different ways this conversation can go. I have no idea where it will end. I just know how I'll get started with a simple hello for Stephen Quayle, and thanks for giving us some time tonight.
Well, hello, Ian. Nice to be with you, and good morning, everyone.
Yeah, and you have so many fans out there. Let me start by making the same assertion I end up making week after week on Coast to Coast. I am the dumbest guy I know, so let me just say thank you right away for putting lots of photos in your book, because that helps me understand things a little better. I find myself, as a skeptic, I am more easily persuaded when I can see photos of things, and there are lots of really good illustrations about what you're talking about, and I think your points are so heady that had you not put those in there, I don't think I would have been able to follow you. But I am so into what you have written because I think you make a cohesive argument, and I'm dying to explore it.
Well, thank you, Ian. You know, the subject of giants is kind of in the same category as dinosaurs from the standpoint everybody is familiar with them, from the children's stories of the ogres, Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack the Giant Killer. All of the mythologies of the world all go back to the time of giants. The incredibly oversized or non-human-sized monuments and sacred sites around the world. And fascinatingly enough, as I've tracked all the different statements from oral history, oral tradition, written records, stelae, hieroglyphics, you name it, the subject of giants can't be escaped or can't be gotten away from, especially when, one picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, for the first time ever, the picture that we put up on our website to kind of hallmark your show tonight, the picture of the tomb of the giant. By the way, that's not me. I'm 54, so that picture was taken after World War II in Egypt.
Oh, good. I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah, and my webmaster didn't put the right heading on it, so you guys took it off my picture. But that's one of the coast-to-coast listeners whose father was actually in Egypt. He's holding a turban that is brass-lined, and he literally was allowed to see, because of his access to the military in those days, he was allowed to see the giant, the 10-foot skeleton. Now, in my book, I basically go over, as you know, I take the entire world and break it down by the records of not only the world's most famous historians, Strabo, Josephus, everybody who's anybody, Berosus the Persian, Herodotus, everybody has mentioned the giants, and it's my contention that all mythology is based on the real fact that there were these individuals who were phenomenally strong, supernaturally brilliant, and absolutely were not mankind's friends, and they were ultimately destroyed, or they would have destroyed mankind.
Well, and this is the part that I also think stands in contrast to how you had originally talked about giants in the introduction there, that, we hear about Jack and the Beanstalk, but while he was a physical giant, he was obviously not a mental giant. And I think that's part of that image that we have of giants, is that the bigger they are, the dumber they fall. And that we are often, that's kind of how we prove ourselves as giant killers, is we use our intellect to compensate for our lack of size. So when you talk about them being super smart, I think that part is sort of a curve in the story that we don't expect.
Well, and I think that's a good point. One of the most... are you there?
I am.
I'm sorry, someone cut out.
Oh,
one of the most amazing stories is King Og, O-G, who is one of the guys that's in very well detailed in the Old Testament. And he basically was 18 feet tall. And in Deuteronomy chapter 3, it talks about King Og, but he was known for his brilliance because he was the last of the giants to be able to resist the attacks upon the giants. Then when you get to the Germanic giants, the Cimbrians and others, I mean, good night, these giants were able to wipe out until a certain point. They were able to wipe out all of Caesar's crack Roman soldiers. So we're not talking about just a bunch of, unshaven, just big guys with a lot of strength. We're talking about some very wise men, especially when it came to battlefield tactics.
Well, and that is its own kind of brilliance. But I mean, this notion of them being intellectually superior as well as physically intimidating, that part is new for me in the giant lore. But let's start at the beginning. For those people that don't know, give an overview, if you would, on how you believe giants came to Earth and how long they lasted on the Earth as a group, which could be reasonably called the giants, as opposed to just tall people amongst us.
Well, first of all, going back to Genesis, it states there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God, meaning the angels, came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And it doesn't matter what myth, what historic structure you put it in, you always have this idea of angels, or as some people, as you're aware, believe the spacemen came to Earth and had sex with Earth women, producing a genetic hybrid. I don't believe that, but I believe specifically that we've got the history books complete, the mythological records complete, with the idea that there were a group of guys, and they were guys that came to Earth, had sexual relations with the Earth women, and produced these supernatural men, which the Bible says that became the mighty men of renown.
Now, other than the biblical record of Genesis 6 on this story, why not females, giants, coming to Earth?
Well, first of all, the interesting, that's a good question. In all, and I want to share this with you, whether it's Greek mythology, Babylonian mythology, any of the ancient Egyptian mythology, it's always in the masculine sense. Now, there were giantesses produced out of that union. I mean, obviously, depending on, the sex of the child giant, you would have giantesses, and there's a whole bunch of fascinating women in history who fulfilled that role, and I'm talking big ladies. I'm talking 12-footers.
Right.
So the point is that, but it's an anomaly that they're always spoken of in the context of males, and that's one of the most striking anomalies that, as I've researched this, that pops right out into the common focus.
Well, I'll just throw something out there, and you just respond to it as you want, but just remember, too, that in Hebrew, the collective of anything would probably be in the male, not female or neuter form. So even if you're talking about, like, as we say, mankind, we don't just mean men, we mean humankind.
Right.
And so I just wonder where in their story, because, if we get too gender specific with that language, it might mean that there were no female giants. But it seems to me somehow, in order for these giants to continue to create more giants, is that there have to be these giantesses in there somewhere in order to keep them big. Or if they kept reproducing with normal human-sized women, at the time would have been 4 to 5 feet tall, it would just dramatically decrease the likelihood that there would ever be any more giants after a few generations.
Well, yeah, but that's absolutely not accurate from the standpoint that even going beyond the linguistic uniqueness of Hebrew, you're finding it in, let's just say, Babylonian, the Akkadian language, too, especially when you're talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
Now, for a lot of years, and for those of you that don't know, and this is on my website, so you can go and read it, it's fascinating, but Gilgamesh was believed to be a fictional character by, quote, the mainstream archaeologists, anthropologists, those who questioned everything was myth to them. But a few years ago, the actual tomb of Gilgamesh was found and basically said, I'll paraphrase it, here lies Gilgamesh, 2/3 God, 1/3 man. And on the engraving, actually the stele, the inscribed rock image, you have a gentleman that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 feet, seated, holding a lion by its rear feet. And next to it, you have one of the interesting guys that's in history called the Lion Man of Moab. And so you've got a contemporary archaeological find bearing witness and solidifying and validating the fact that what mainstream archaeologists said was only fiction, and Epic of Gilgamesh is 4,500 years old, is very, very now prominent. And I find it unique and truly fascinating that the main story, the oldest poetic narrative now, the validation has come through modern archaeology.
Well, so just then, so we wrap up the timeline as you present it, the fallen ones come and they procreate with earth women, and this line of giants continues for how long?
Well, it continued both through the fall and after, it continued through Noah's flood and after, because, again, Genesis says there were giants in those days both before and after. And now the interesting thing that you have is you actually have tales of giants, and I'm talking living giants, in everything from the Solomon Island to different parts of the world. And again, modern man has a hard time finding it, but for those that don't know what we're talking about, that are on the Internet, they can go to the link we put up for Coast to Coast and click on it. You can see the Kashmir giants on the front of my book. One of them's 9 feet tall, one of them's 10 feet tall at the turn of the century. That was 1905 when the British 6-foot explorer was taken with those pictures, Ian.
Well, and that's fascinating, and I love that photo. And again, thanks for including that kind of work, because it really helps bring it home for me. But explain, though, when did giants stop being a nation of giants? When was the, if you'll pardon the term, the diaspora of giants, when did they stop being some sort of cohesive nationality, if you will, that had that reigned together or worked and survived in a group?
Well, probably the most contemporary group, when we're talking group, hundreds of giants, we're probably talking the Solomon Island giants, because when the Japanese landed at Guadalcanal, even the Japanese historians, now we're talking obviously World War II, were basically the advanced party that landed on one side of the island was decimated, and they were literally destroyed by the giants. Now, people still can't grasp that we're talking about these individuals. The question that will come up, obviously, in the show is, where are they if they're real, and why aren't they presented to the public? I have an answer for that, but we'll get to that a little later.
Okay, well...
But to answer your question...
Yeah, because you're killing me on that. I'm so dying to know the answer to that. But go ahead. Now, finish up.
But all of the great explorers, from De Soto, Magellan, Captain Cook, all the circumnavigators of the world, all encountered giants. And so when you're talking about Cortez and the chronicles of his that were taken both in in Mexico, and those who went into South America, you have contemporary writings of groups of giants. For instance, the Patagonians up until the 1850s, 1890s. Patagonia, by the way, the word means big feet. I actually have on my website a documentation of the Gentleman's Gazette, I think written in about 1767, that goes into great detail on Magellan's encounter of the Patagonian giants.
All right. So, just so if I can understand this, we believe that the giants were formed by fallen angels that come to a particular area in the Bible during a period of time. And then do they spread out from there almost immediately, or is there a central event that you believe in the timeline of giants which then sends them spreading out all over the world? Or did these fallen angels, as you describe them, come down simultaneously to various places around the earth?
Well, they first descended on Mount Hermon, which is in the Middle East. But then there was a diaspora, or a dispersion of them, because, again, when they encountered the Israelites, God gave the command to Joshua and Caleb to go into the Promised Land, and that's when the famous statement, when Joshua and Caleb go into the Promised Land to spy it out, they said, we were as grasshoppers in their sight, and so we were in ours. And they talked about the land being a terrible land because it devoured its inhabitants. One of the unusual things about the giants, that no matter where you encounter them worldwide, they're always cannibalistic. And it's fascinating because, again, it doesn't matter if it's Caesar dealing with the German giants, or Caesar dealing with the Gaelic giants, or the British giants. The issue is they're always dealing with some pretty nasty characters. And by the way, this was the basis of Hitler's wanting to build the Aryan race, rebuild it, was based on the Teutonic giants,
right.
The Cimbrians. And what most people don't understand, these guys were 12 to 14 feet tall, as recorded by the different Caesars that had to fight them. And, I mean, we're talking about some amazing battles. For instance, one of the words that enters into common usage that most people don't realize comes from the giants. It's cutting someone down to size. That came from the infamous battles of the Roman soldiers against the German giants. And by the way, this is all cataloged in my book, and I've got enough footnotes to make anybody sink under the weight of them.
You do. You
but I mean, I've got thousands of footnotes. So the interesting thing is that the average Roman fighting soldier came up to the kneecaps of some of these giants.
Get out! I mean,
and what's amazing is that there were times when, with the exception of 2 or 3 men, the giants totally wiped out all of Caesar's army, and until a really amazing guy by the name of Marius, a 25-year-old general, figured out how to basically build lion traps and lure the giants in. But what was fascinating, they had blonde hair down to their waist. They were incredibly tall, and they wore their hair kind of in spikes. Some of them wore it in spikes. Some wore fancy clothes. Some wore no clothes. But the point is that the sound of their nasal pharyngeal scream was unearthly, and again, we'll get to this a little later on in the show, but it's very much like in recorded history. It's like what contemporary people around the world have encountered when they've encountered the Yeti, the abominable snowmen, the Yowie. You know, they're known by different names all around the world. But the sound of these things was amazing, and that's what basically disheartened initially the Roman soldiers. Also, the word berserk. You know, we always talk about someone going berserk.
And I know that berserkers were a particular type of warrior. Are you saying they were giants?
Absolutely. And that's where we get that word, because they were so crazy. They were so like anything that the Roman legions had ever encountered, and that's where we get the word. So getting back to Hitler, Hitler sent out a crack group of SS agents called the Ahnenerbe, and they were looking for all of the artifacts, and we'll get to that too, but specifically they were looking for the giants, the golden sarcophaguses, and they went all over the world looking for those individuals.